Hello, welcome to the I'm a Busy Guy show. My name is Vince LoCascio, and I've got a really busy guy on the show. His name is Dr. Dom Candeloro. He's an author, professor of history, he's a librarian at Casa, Italia in Stone Park. Welcome to the show, Dom.
Oh, glad to be here, Vince.
Nice to have you here. We'll get back up and tell a little bit about your history. You were born in Chicago Heights?
Yes, I was born in Chicago Heights. My father was born in Italy, in Casoli, in Abruzzo, Italy, not too far from Chieti, very mountainous, beautiful country. And my mother was born in Amazzano. And she came here as a little girl, and about 5 years old, in 1914. And came along with her family and about another 100 folks from that hometown to Chicago Heights. So there was a colony of Amazzanese in Chicago Heights that I grew up with in the 1940s and 50s.
And I know you obviously have a great love for Chicago Heights, going as far as writing a couple books about it that we'll talk about later. But you were also administrative assistant to the mayor at one time?
It's a pretty long story, but I got to know Angelo Sam Ciambrone in the late 70s, early 80s when we did a radio show in Chicago Heights on WCGO. We had an Italian-American owner, Tony Santucci, and he gave us an hour on Sunday afternoons at 1 o'clock. It was Ciao South Suburbia, the community affairs show with the Italian flair.
Was it in Italian or in
sometimes English? It was in Italian, but usually it was in English. And Tony Scariano, who was a well-known state legislator and then appellate court judge and a really sterling character, and Angelo Ciambrone, the three of us carried on the show. We're the co-hosts of the show. And we would talk about the old times in the Italian-American community. We'd talk to people who were doing fundraisers and festivals and that sort of thing, and play a little bit of Italian music. And sometimes we had Italian-American authors on. And we even had Studs Terkel come down. And
really?
We interviewed Studs Terkel, so they turned the tables on him.
Interesting. Growing up, did you speak Italian at home? Did you learn how to speak it?
Well, actually, it was kind of passive. I understood the Italian that my parents were speaking, but I usually spoke to them in English, and they spoke to me in Italian. So we had a perfect miscommunication in addition to all the other miscommunication you have between the generations. But I was not originally comfortable being an Italian-American.
For what reason?
At school, I was not made to feel that I had something special to offer because I had access to maybe a little bit of the Italian language or to Italian culture. I was embarrassed to have my mother speak to me in Italian, say at a PTA function where they had the students and the kids. I didn't want to be spoken to in Italian in public where Americans could hear that and identify me as maybe the other.
Really? Well, I know part of the, not just our house growing up, but, a lot of it was spoken, they wanted us to speak English because they wanted us to be Americans.
Yeah.
And then also they talked in Italian because they didn't want us to know what they were saying. If talking about like kids, you spell different things in front of them. But now, like myself, I've spent the rest of my life trying to learn Italian, either tapes and books and all that.
Of course, at World War II, Italy was the enemy. And there was a lot of bad treatment of Italians, especially in California, but also in New York. And Italians had to decide whether they were Italian or American. And overwhelmingly, they decided that they were American, and they played down, especially in public, their Italian-ness. And so that's when a kind of prejudice against Italian language occurred. We don't want our kids to suffer what we've suffered as outcasts in the early part of World War II when Italy was an enemy of the United States.
Which is a surprising, not surprising fact, but there was a very, very high percentage of guys that fought in the war that were Italians.
Oh, of course. Of the 15 million GIs in World War II, 1 million approximately were Italian Americans. And this was an important aspect in the development of the Americanism of Italian American young people. For the first time, they got out of their neighborhoods, they saw the world, and they identified with a lot of the American values, and sometimes with American food and with the American ideal. When they got back from the Army, they didn't want to live in the Italian community anymore, especially they didn't want to live in the same house as their parents lived. They wanted to live maybe in the nicer part of town where they could get a GI loan to go and buy.
Yeah, and that's if they came back. I mean, I had an uncle, my Uncle Harry gave his life. Many lost their lives.
A lot of Gold Star mothers
for this country. It's all in your books, which people should read, but what was the nucleus of why Italians came to Chicago, to New York, to America?
Okay, we sum it up in pane e lavoro. Pane is bread, lavoro is work. The economic situation and the social situation in Italy in the last part of the 19th century, that's the 1800s, was horrible. And although people worked and worked and worked, they got nowhere. And so in the 60s, Italians were going to South America to find their fortune. And as time went on, things changed in South America, and they began to come to North America after the Civil War was over. And then the American industry needed workers. And so there were efforts to recruit not only Italians, but other European immigrants to come to the United States to give us the unskilled labor that we needed to industrialize, to build the railroads and to man the factories, et cetera, et cetera. This was America was growing very fast, and Chicago was the fastest growing city during the period 1870 to 1900.
Very interesting. I mean, there's that expression, we discovered it, we named it, and we built it.
Yeah, well, we certainly put a lot of effort into building it.
What, obviously you're a historian. What inspired your interest in becoming and documenting this? Because it's obviously a great passion that you have.
Okay. Well, fairly early I decided to become a historian, a teacher, maybe a high school teacher. I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois aiming at a PhD or an MA in American history. And while I was there, I met Rudolph Veicoli. Rudolph Veicoli was from the East Coast. He'd studied at the University of Wisconsin, and he'd done his dissertation on Chicago Italians before World War I. Now, when I got to talking to him, and he had done research that touched on my family, my mother's family, and the people from Amazzano, where my mother was from. And for the first time, I realized that in addition to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, that Italian Americans were really a part of American history, and that they deserved the same kind of historical study that all the other presidents and kings and prime ministers, et cetera, in our history have. And so this was part of a larger movement going on. People talked about social history, and they talked about African American history, women's history, labor history, to include everything, and not just the history of the dead white man, as they say. And so I got interested in it, and an opportunity came up about 10 years later after I worked for Veicoli to to run a temporary program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And so I was uniquely equipped because I had been trained as a professional historian, and I had also lived it, lived not the immigrant experience, but all of my relatives were immigrants, and I had grown up in that culture, so I instinctively knew a lot of it, and I got to enjoying it. It was easy for me, and I guess I was fairly good at it, and nobody else was doing it either. So I cornered the market on Italian-American history.
Well, on behalf of the Italian community, thank you, because it's great what you do, the books. A subject that I think needs to be addressed while we're talking here is defamation, because I've heard you in other interviews, what you have to say about that.
Well, I think it is true that people take Italian Americans for granted, and we might be the last ethnic group that it's okay to make jokes about. But maybe, we can take it. Italian Americans aren't poor. In fact, sometimes I think I'm the poorest Italian American that I know. Everybody's middle class or better, unless they've had some horrible event happen in their life, or a sickness or something like that. We're not really a needy ethnic group. We've achieved quite a bit. Look at the Supreme Court, look at the annals of the CEOs around the country. Italian Americans do very well economically and socially. But we don't get enough respect, and it does bother a lot of Italian Americans, and it does bother me. And I think we need to call the press on it whenever they do it. And they do it maybe unconsciously or subconsciously. Maybe they didn't mean any harm, but if you substitute a different ethnic group for Italian American in the joke that they just made, it would be offensive,
yeah.
and they wouldn't do it. So that's that part. But there's another aspect of it, too. And I know a lot of Italian Americans who really get lathered up when there's Jersey Shores or The Sopranos or The Godfather. And they spend all their energy protesting. And a lot of times this gives more publicity to the offending media piece. And I'm also waiting for these same people to come back to us in the Italian intellectual community, if I could call it that, the creative community, to say, hey, here's a grant, write a book, do a play, make a movie that shows what we're really like. And I haven't seen enough of that. And I'm hoping that we do get to that point. Italian Americans aren't poor. They have a lot of organizations that raise a lot of money. And we should be, my favorite hobby horse is to suggest that we establish endowed professorships of Italian American studies. Other ethnic groups have done this successfully at universities and colleges throughout the country, and we should have our share of study centers that are devoted to the history and culture of Italian Americans.
That's a great thought. I mean, a thought that I have about it is, you have the Godfather movies, this, and the Sopranos and all that. It's something that people take out of that. They have, if you take out all the violence and you take out all the bad things about it, what's left, which really I think helps these become entertainment, is the love for Italians, because the way we eat, the way, family is, the way a father wants to take care of his son. So there's all that good in there, but unfortunately it's mixed in with all the violence and all the, the mafia.
Yeah, maybe we're just more interesting, and maybe it's just that we make a big thing out of so many aspects of our lives.
Food.
Everything's important, even the slightest. And I go back to the Italian-American wedding of that started in the 1920s, and the over-the-top effort to really make it a bang-up affair.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly, and about how it was big on the florist, the photographer, the tuxedos, and Italians helped to
there was an
to make that a big
industry of
thing, yeah.
Italian-American mini industries to facilitate the big weddings and the lavish weddings, and people made small businesses out of them, or maybe sometimes big business out of them.
Well, we're somewhat limited on times, but I'd love to go through and show some of the books you have. Obviously, the first one about Chicago Heights.
Yeah, this picture on the cover is a picture of young men in 1942 getting on buses because they had been inducted into the Army. And the vast majority of them are Italian Americans. That's from Chicago Heights. And you can see the downtown area as it was thriving in Chicago Heights in the background.
The next, Italians in Chicago.
Yeah, these are Arcadia books. Arcadia is famous for putting out photo books of local history, and they're just wonderful for saving all of these memories on a local level. And that picture was done at All Saints St. Anthony's in the Bridgeport neighborhood, and most of the people in that picture are Italian American. And
it's just a different spin on it, but it's another book, Chicago Italians.
Yeah, that's the lavish wedding I told you about 20 people in the wedding party. And this particular book is another Arcadia book, but it's not a picture book. It's a narrative, and it tries to tell the story from the 1850s, when the first Italians came to Chicago, to just the other day.
I don't remember, but I was told that always the big thing at Italian weddings was strawberry pop and beef sandwiches.
Oh, yeah, I could drink 10 bottles of the strawberry pop.
And then a more updated version, or a different era, I should say. Is
this is hot off the presses, yeah. I had come under a little bit of criticism and questioning in my previous books, especially from the newest immigrants, of course, who came after World War II. Of course, when I started writing, they had barely gotten here. But now, in 2010, 2011, it's 50, 60 years that Italians, this new wave of Italians have come. And so I did a whole book on the new immigrants, the immigrants who came after World War II. And we have a section on conditions in Italy during the war and after the war, and conditions were really bad. They always referred to Italy during that time as war-torn. And there was a big, big migration out of Italy, not just to the United States, but to Canada, to Latin America, to Australia, and almost any other place, and to other parts of Europe. So at this point, there are probably more people, more than 60 million people of Italian origin who live outside of Italy as who live inside of Italy. So that Italy has a sort of a mirror image in the rest of the world, which has a lot of implications.
Yeah, which a lot of cities like to claim that they have a little Italy.
Yeah.
Along the way, you speak Italian, French, and Russian?
Well, the Russian I just passed a test on, but the Italian, I visited Italy more than 30 times now. In the last few years, once a year, sometimes twice a year, we've put on with some of my partners in Italy some exhibits about the dream, per non dimenticare, the dream of the immigrant. And we had access to the National Archives of Italy in Rome, their whole exhibit space, and we filled it with photographs and documents from Chicago and really all the major cities of the United States, and with art that related to immigration, and it was a big thrill to do that. And so I've functioned in Italy, and my Italian vocabulary is very high, but my Italian is not standard Italian, so I hesitate to speak to Italian language students for fear that they'll copy my mistakes.
It's evident of the strong Italian pride in the Chicagoland area. But some of the organizations I want to talk about, and some you've been active in, or helped found, whatever the case may be, the Joint Civic Committee of Italian Americans?
Oh yeah, going back to the 1950s, the Joint Civic Committee is really an organization of organizations. So it brings everybody together, and it has been the spokesman for the Italian American community ever since, and has really directed the largest activities, including, of course, the Columbus Day Parade and the sort of reaction to defamation. And for many years, Tony Sorrentino, a very good friend, very great man, was the executive director of the Joint Civic Committee of Italian Americans. And there's the Secretary Marie, who's been there more than 50 years, and every year she lines up about 100 high school bands to be in the Columbus Day Parade. God bless her, I don't know how she does it.
What a great event that is, too.
Yeah.
And at Casa Italia, which is the way Joanne Saprica phrased it for me, she said, the Joint Civic is the organization, Casa Italia is the place, and Frenoia is the newspaper. But tell me, because at Casa Italia there's a library.
Yeah.
And you run that? Or?
Okay, yeah. Well, our library goes back to the early 1930s when the Casa Italia complex was originally built. It was built as a Sacred Heart seminary of the Scalabrini Fathers who ministered to Italian immigrants. And in the 1960s, the seminary was phased out, and the property was kind of vacant. And Father August Feccia came along, and his idea was to turn the old seminary into the Italian Cultural Center, and to help the new immigrants who were coming to find a friendly place, and to maintain the culture, create a library where they could get material in Italian and learn English at the same time as keeping in contact with other Italians, etc. So the Italian Cultural Center was founded 40-some years ago. As time went on, the Scalabrini Fathers withdrew completely from it about 1998, and they leased the whole property, which is a big 17-acre plot.
Beautiful campus.
It's a campus, yeah. It could be a small college. And to the Italian community leaders who organized themselves as Casa Italia Incorporated. And a number of business leaders, Tony Fornelli, the Toronto family, etc., were the mainstays of the original board. And they built, there was a lot of maintenance to be done, etc., and in the last 10 or 12 years, they've completed most of that. We have a very good physical plant, and about 5 years ago, the Fornelli family gave a grant of about $20,000 to the library, and we began buying books again, and we began upgrading our computer capabilities and focusing on creating an archive of Italian American history. You know, Italian American history is at risk of being lost in Chicago and elsewhere around the country. I'm not talking about Italy. The country of Italy will always have a history. They've got museums, universities, etc., history teachers there maintaining the history of Italy. I'm talking about the history of your grandmother, my grandfather, the history of those Italian immigrants who came to Chicago. And unless we do something, unless we put information about them between the covers of books or on DVDs or on documentaries like And They Came to Chicago and 5,000 Miles from Home, unless we do that, their story will be forgotten. It will be as if they never existed. Yeah. And so I'm dedicated, and what time I have left and whatever volunteers I can scrape up and whatever money anybody wants to throw my way, I'm dedicated to preserving that at the Casa Italia, preserving it on our computers. We can scan any picture, document, memorabilia you've got, give us a little bit of identification, and we'll put it on our hard drive and save it forever. And we have at the Casa Italia not only an archive, but we have an exhibit that was a result of that Italians in Chicago project of the 1970s, 1980s that tells the story of Italians in Chicago. We've got some electronic aspects to it these days. We've got an art exhibit of about 100 works of art by Italian Americans. We have a miniature of the Vatican, which is a masterpiece.
Sicilian Museum.
And we've got, of course, the Sicilian Museum, designed by and executed by John Bucci, with a lot of images of the beauty and splendor of Sicily. We have a Calabrese room. We also have the Italian-American Veterans Museum, which
Mass
Paul
in
Basil,
Italian every
Mass
Sunday.
in Italian every Sunday at noon. And Father Feccia is carrying on Radio Maria, which is a religious programming broadcast in Italian to specially equipped radios, which are a comfort to a lot of especially older Italian Americans.
Well, you truly are a case of not just to walk or talk the talk, but you are truly walking the walk. I mean, the proof is evident here.
Well,
Your
thank you. We need all the help we can get and all the support we can get, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, you're kidding. And to let people know that don't know, Casa Italia is in Stone Park.
Yes.
And their website is casaitaliachicago.net. And Dominic, there's so many things going on. We've got to find Dominic and his books on Google Books, Amazon.com, and I can't, I thank you
can even
so
find
much
me
for
at
being here today.
dominic.candeloro@gmail.com.
Beautiful. I want to thank you for being on the show. I got some cannolis from Angelo Gelato, and I hope you enjoy these. So we'll move on to a few things here, and thank you once again for being on this show. People know there's all kinds of Italian festivals that go on in Chicago. To learn more about my show, busyguy.co, too busy for an M. So thanks again for Dominic for being here. Your latest project is what, the future of Italian Americans?
Oh yeah, I'm doing an anthology on of 20 writers on Italians in Chicago. I hope to have it done by May 8th.
Beautiful.
And what do you got in here?
The cannolis.
Cannolis.
Yeah. Excuse me for 1 second. I got to call somebody. You know what? They're calling me.
What?
I got a phone call.
What?
Hold on 1 second. Hello? Yeah. No, I'm just finishing now. Yeah. Okay, bye. I have to meet somebody. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm a busy guy.
Me too.
I got to run.
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk to you later.